have 6 minutes on the clock. Everybody good? All right. Are you ready?
I am indeed.
Wonderful. Judges, are you ready? Those audience ready? All right. All righty. So first, I'm going to say a big round of thank yous. First to my opponent for being here today. Congratulations on making it. I hope you enjoy yourself. Next to my audience, thank you guys for coming out. This is a large group of people, so I hope we keep you guys entertained. Lastly, to my judges, I hope you have fun and learn something new. And also, thank you for judging us today. Thank you for taking this time out of your schedule. All right, with that, I'm going to go over some definitions, value criteria, stuff like that. Then I'm going to bring up my argumentation and critique his own. So I agree with my opponent's definitions, most of them, except for the one that comes to 24-hour news. I would like to submit that we should also include cable established news networks outside of the country, such as the BBC in England, other stuff such as that. Simply, and I'm not going to debate hard on that. I'm just saying that Americans get news from those sources as well, so I think that should be considered. So that's why I would stipulate that that be included under the definition of 24-hour cable news. Lastly, I agree with him on his weighing mechanism. I'm going to label this as a fact round today because that helps us understand what on balance is, like what the weighing mechanism is actually measuring. So this is a fact round today. And lastly, our value criteria is going to be democracy today. We need to think about this in terms of democracy. With that in mind, I have three main arguments here. The first is that cable news is vital to forensics and national debate as a whole, like the actual discussion our country has as a people. Next, cable news is necessary for freedom of speech. And then thirdly, cable news brings connection and help to local populations. So I'm going to go over my first contention here at the beginning here. Cable news is vital to forensics and national debate. As my opponent brought up, he talked about different news sources and the effects they have on people. But I would like to point out that without cable news, we wouldn't be able to have this sort of debate structure here today. We wouldn't be able to argue about facts and terminology and debate things the way we've been doing all day. I bet most of us in this room who've actually debated have probably cited from some of the places that he mentioned in his first speech. So to keep that in mind. Moving on to my second contention, cable news is necessary for freedom of speech. The question here today is not whether cable news stations and other such things are biased. Everyone has bias. The government has bias, media sources have bias, everyone in this room has bias whenever they post on social media. What we need to consider, rather, is what the effect without cable news networks would be. The effect without cable news networks is that the American population, for the most part, will be illiterate to the daily goings-on around them. And if the national population is illiterate to the daily goings-on around them, how can we have successful functioning democracy? Democracy is predicated upon the belief that the population is well informed on topics going on around us, so that when they vote people into office who will lead us and do policies for us, we actually are satisfied with the job and what they're doing. So cable news network is vital simply for the fact that it maintains freedom of speech and provides knowledge to the population. For example, it also provides a check on the government. It's often called the first estate. As the ACLU points out, quote, "The press is meant to serve the governed, not the governors. The freedom of the press, protected by the First Amendment, is critical to a democracy in which the government is accountable to the people. A free media functions as a watchdog that can investigate and report on government wrongdoing." These cable news networks are the professional establishment, journalists, and media in this country. That is their job. They are the fourth estate. If we're going to talk about whether on balance cable news networks are good or bad and all that sort of stuff, we have to realize the vital job they bring to our democracy. Lastly, going into my third contention here before I start to refute his own arguments, connection and other benefits of cable news media. The Federal Communications Commission points out from 2021 that cable news provides a platform for the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, so basically alerts people in national emergencies and other such things. It also helps families and households struggling to afford internet services during COVID. They were able to get news and other valuable information from cable news media. And lastly, it helps connect eligible households to hold jobs, provides knowledge about critical healthcare services, virtual classrooms, and more. With that, those are my three contentions. I'm now going to go over what he talked about. He had three main contentions. His first one was the focus of the news. He said that the news causes micro-stress, that it leads to negative extrapolation, all these sorts of things. The second one is that it leads to polarization. And then his third argument was that it leads to bad mental health as a result. In going over the first contention here today, the way I'm going to refute this is by pointing out that what would the alternative be? If cable news, if what they are doing is telling us about the negative goings on in the world, maybe we shouldn't blame that on cable news. We should just realize that a lot of stuff that goes on around the world is bad. Like, that's just the fact of the matter. There are a lot of natural disasters. There is a lot of terrible things going on. He mentioned some headlines such as student gets mauled by bear or somebody gets shot. It's not cable news' fault that these things happen. They're just reporting them. So to say that cable news is really focusing in on news that is bad isn't really fair. Instead, cable news is just reporting things as they're happening. Lastly, he goes into polarization. Now, his issue with the polarization argument is that he sort of assumes that it's the causation instead of the effect. The fact of the matter is our country has been going towards a political divide for a long time. Cable news did not create Donald Trump. Donald Trump came along. Cable news did not create him. So if we're going to talk about polarization in this country, we have to recognize that it's because there's an ideological divide in our country, and the cable news is only fostering debate. It is not the cause of our political polarization. Okay. I stand ready for class examination.
Judges? Good? Opposition? Excellent. How much cable news did you watch in the last 30 minutes preparing for this debate?
I didn't watch any. It was recent.
Excellent. Is cable news vital, or is it just news that is vital to any of your contentions? Because remember, we're specifically talking about cable news.
I'm talking about cable news.
Okay, so cable news is vital to those contentions. We cannot conduct forensics without cable news.
I'm saying it makes our job very difficult.
Okay, so difficult, not vital, right? Okay, perfect. So you said that it is going to create illiteracy around the globe by removing cable news. Do you have any kind of sourcing for that, being that this is a factor around?
I either misspoke or I didn't say that, because what I was saying in my contentions is that without cable news, you're going to have illiteracy of what's going on in the world in our country. That's
Gotcha. Do you have sourcing for that?
Sourcing for that, I can go through and I can find it for you if you want.
Okay. So while you're doing that, how specifically does cable news protect free speech?
Yes, okay, Gingrich 2018.
Okay, gotcha. How specifically does cable news protect free speech?
Because it's as I quoted in my source from the ACLU, it's literally called the fourth estate. It's the watchdog that helps report on the goings on in the government. It helps basically research what's going on. It calls them to account. And also, because we're a democracy, it keeps the people informed of what's going on. So that helps them when it comes to voting.
I think you're confusing cable news with the press. So the Constitution doesn't protect cable news. The Constitution protects the freedom of the press, which is the fourth estate. So remember, definitionally, we're talking about cable news, right?
Right, and how is that not part of the press?
It is part of the press, but it is not the press, correct?
It is the press because it's...
It is the only press?
I didn't say it's the only press.
Okay, so it's part of the press.
Okay, part of the press.
Part of the press, okay, great. So what specific good derives from cable news? Just free speech vital to forensics?
First, okay. Do I have
Time's
time
up.
to finish that?
Okay. Judges? Need a minute? 1, 2, good? Okay. Opposition ready? All right. So I have a 3-minute refutation, and I'm going to use all 3 minutes for that refutation. So, first of all, the negative contentions is that cable news specifically is vital to forensics, vital to free speech. Okay, the word vital means that it cannot exist without it. So, cable news, as defined by the affirmative, is 24-hour news specifically in the United States. Examples, CNN, Fox, CNBC. I would argue simply none of my sources come from a cable news network. I have 17 sources, not a single one came from a cable news network. So, not vital to forensics. Number 2, vital to free speech. Again, the First Amendment says that the press is protected. Freedom of speech is protected. Freedom of expression is protected, not cable news. So press encompasses everything. press encompasses print media, all other kinds of news, local news. We're specifically talking about 24-hour cable news. That is not vital to protecting free speech. And if the negative would like to make that argument, I would love to see how, because I don't see how we cannot have free speech absent cable news. So number 3, the connection emergency broadband, that is not related to cable news. So cable news is not what creates emergency broadband. The FCC creates emergency broadband. It goes out over the airwaves, but it is not, cable news is not essential for the emergency broadband network. Same thing for virtual classrooms. Virtual classrooms don't happen on CNN, CNBC, Fox News. So all of those should flow through the affirmative side. So to restate, the key issues here is that the focus of the news is negative. My opponent says that, well, the world is negative. So to refute that, I would point out a cable news network did not cover the fact that Little Pellissippi State Community College came from Knoxville, Tennessee to the national championships, right? That's positive news. We aren't on Fox. So they didn't cover the positive news. Why? Because 87% of that news is negative, because that is what people are watching. So number 2, the idea of polarization. Yes, cable news did not create polarization. Cable news instead inflames polarization. That is my argument. It's not that it didn't exist prior, it's that it makes it worse. Creates more harm than good. So creates more harm than good, it inflames polarization. And my last point wasn't touched at all by the negative. That's the idea of mental and physical health, so that's going to automatically flow through to the ballot. So to restate, the affirmative contentions are the focus of cable news, the polarizing nature, and the mental health and physical health contentions.